So Subaru has died a lot, with each death being more brutal and horrifying than the last. And with there being no sign of things changing anytime soon, and to remind everyone about the suffering that he has gone through up to this point, I'm going to go through and explain every last gruesome Subaru death seen throughout seasons 1 to 3. But before that, as a quick disclaimer, I just have to tell you that some of the deaths in this video are extremely graphic. So be warned that after watching this video completely, you may be traumatized. A lot like how Subaru is currently in the story. Now with that said, let's begin with episode 1 of the entire series, where we see Subaru die not once, but twice to the same psycho assassin, Elsa Granyert. The first was in his attempt to aid Amelia in finding her insignia, which of course led them both to the old loot house, where after a brief search for the insignia, he found the body of Old Man Rom, and was then quickly attacked by Elsa herself, an attack that of course also resulted in his guts being sliced open. It's then revealed as he dies that Amelia herself was also attacked and killed, which then of course led to him awakening his return by death ability, which then only worked to bring him right back to the old loot house once again, where after a disagreement with Elsa over the insignia led her to killing both Old Man Rom and Felt, at which point Subaru is forced to fight her off himself, although even with his remembering of her attack pattern, she still manages to slice and kill the young determined fool. Now following this, the next time we see Subaru die is actually in episode 2, after his loop was of course reset by dying to Elsa for the second time. Now on his way to Amelia, he actually gets lost down a dark alleyway. Here he runs into the same group of thugs that he met in the first loop, only back then he of course got saved by Amelia herself. This time however, without her around, Subaru just tries to push past them and talk tough like he's some big guy. But they're not intimidated at all, and in fact in the end just decide to stab him, which of course only leads to him collapsing and bleeding to death on the floor, marking his third death in just 2 episodes. Now later we see him die once again, for the 4th time, mysteriously in his sleep. Now this was due to the lethal curse caused by the malediction magic, with the source of the curse being a bite from a mythical beast, which in this case appeared to be a stray puppy found in the village full of kids. You see, one day while in the village, Subaru started to rub a stray puppy, which then led to the puppy itself biting him, which also then a few days later led to him being cursed to die, like I said, a peaceful death in his sleep. We then see that in his next loop, he does everything he possibly can to prevent dying in his sleep. However, he still accidentally gets bit by that dog and once again ends up sick. However, this time, instead of dying in his sleep, he awakes and goes in search for some help, only to mysteriously get sliced up like some gourmet sashimi. Now of course, at this point he has no clue who attacked him, but we eventually learn in his next loop that it's actually the best girl of the entire series, Rem, who did it simply out of her immense distrust for him and how he acts. Now this would then follow into his next loop where he decides to leave the mansion and travel outside, so as to keep watch to see who is actually trying to kill him. Only this also leads Rem to following him outside the mansion and attacking him once again. Only as she plans to torture him to death, Ram actually shows some mercy, and simply just removes his head using her wind magic. Now in the next loop we see Subaru make a pact with Beatrice. This was of course to save his life from Rem, who plans to attack him that night. However, inadvertently after making this pact, Rem is actually the one that dies that night instead, which then leads Ram into a rampage where she plans to kill Subaru. However, due to his pact with Beatrice, she saves him and he survives. Only eventually down the line, he realizes how much he actually cares for Rem, Ram and everyone else around. And because he wants them all to live long, happy lives, he throws himself off a cliff, and of course, dies. Now in the next loop, he manages to survive for quite some time, and we don't actually see another death until episode 15 of season 1. When he not only died once or twice, but 3 times to Puck himself. With the first, like I said, happening in episode 15 at the very beginning, when he arrived back to the Roswell mansion to find that everyone there had died, including Amelia, which led Puck into a massive rage which resulted in everyone else around, including Subaru himself, being frozen to death. And then of course a second death to Puck would come in a similar way, when after being delayed by the witch cult led him and Rem to once again arriving too late to help Amelia, resulting once again in him not only getting frozen to death by Puck, but also having his head severed as well. And then finally for his third death to Puck, this came after he sacrificed Rem to the white whale and told Amelia about his return by death ability, which then also kind of resulted in Amelia herself mysteriously dying, which at this point you might have guessed made Puck incredibly angry, to the point that he not only froze Subaru completely, but also watched as he shattered to pieces. Now in the next loop, he managed to find a way around the witch cult and Puck, and even along the way managed to defeat Beetlejuice himself. However, soon after this, he'd have a strange feeling running throughout his entire body, which eventually turned out to be Beetlejuice's possession of his body. Now after finding this out, he then asks his companions around to just end his life, before he's completely taken over by this madman, which they eventually do with a lot of hesitation and a swing of a sword. Now in the following loop, we will see Subaru end his own life, after discovering that Rem has lost her memories and that everyone around, including her own sister, has no idea who the hell she is. However, sadly, this effort would end in vain, as even after starting a new loop, Rem is still forgotten by everyone around. This was due to his save point being after the time that Rem got forgotten, meaning it's impossible for him to revert it by simply dying. Now next we see Subaru return to the mansion, where it's so incredibly quiet that he begins to worry about Rem. But when he went to rush over to her to see if she's okay, he gets attacked, with his stomach being sliced open like one of the previous loops. And shockingly enough, just like the previous loops, it happened to be by the same person as before, Elsa, who's basically back to get her revenge. Now he eventually ends up back in front of her in his next loop. However, despite everyone's best efforts, she eventually cuts through everybody in the mansion and eventually makes her way to him, stabbing him through the stomach once again, resulting in him dying for the 14th time so far. Now moving on, up next we have one of the worst deaths and loops that we've ever seen. It's the death that of course comes on behalf of the Great Rabbit. You see, Subaru goes to reach for what appears to be a cute and soft looking bunny, but then almost immediately his hand gets blown off, at which point he enters a state of shock and is instantly jumped by a horde of wild hungry rabbits, who devour him completely, leaving nothing behind, marking, like I said in the beginning, one of the worst deaths and loops that he has ever had. Now in the next loop we see as Subaru finishes his meeting with Echidna, he returns to the real world, where he is then surrounded by not only some mysterious shadows but also Satella, who plans to consume him completely. Now luckily he does get saved by Garfield himself, but eventually Satella manages to catch up to them and kills Garfield easily, and then doing what she planned to do in the very beginning, absorbing Subaru entirely, at which point Subaru decides to kill himself, so as to both escape and to maintain any sanity that he has left. Now in the next loop, Subaru gets sent back to the sanctuary by Beatrice, which eventually leads him to his confrontation with Roswell, alongside both Ram and Garfield. However, Roswell would go on to kill both of them and allow himself to get eaten by the Great Rabbit, with Subaru just barely escaping the situation and suffering major injuries in the process, injuries that he would eventually succumb to in the arms of Amelia. Now amazingly, in his next loop, Subaru actually manages to avoid death completely for an entire year, if you can believe that was even possible. But eventually he does go on to die to Sirius herself. For see, after splitting away from Amelia and going to the center of town, he sees Sirius making an announcement on top of the clock tower, at which point we begin to see everyone, including Subaru, get entranced by what she is saying, even though every single word that comes out of her mouth is complete insanity. We then see his and everyone else's eyes around begin to glow red, at which point she throws the crying boy from the tower, and as his head hits the ground and explodes, so does everyone else's around, including Subaru's, marking, like I said, his first death in an entire year. Now we then see in his next loop that he tries to save the boy once again from the crazy psycho bitch. But as he gets close to the boy, he begins to experience all the same feelings of fear that the boy is currently feeling. At which point Sirius shows up and throws a chain around his neck, kicking him from the tower and choking the life from his body. And because of the connection spell that currently still remains, the young boy also shares in the same pain and suffering that Subaru is currently going through, marking yet another of his most gruesome deaths in the entire series. Now in his next attempt to save the boy, he gets Ratchins to summon Reinhardt, who quickly overpowers the psycho and slices her in half. However, once again, due to her connection to everyone around, including Subaru himself, they also accidentally get sliced as well, meaning Subaru technically died to the guy that he brought along to save the day. Now that also marks every death seen in the anime up to this point. But going into season 4, we're of course getting the adaptation of Arc 6, which if you're not aware, not only has more deaths than every other arc combined, but also some of the most depressing loops that we have ever seen. So of course when that drops in the future, I'll be sure to update this list with all the gruesome deaths that of course come from it. But for now, and with that said, I do hope you all enjoyed, and consider subscribing for more future videos. And if not, just like the video down below, and have a great day or night wherever you are, and peace.